I understand that you were named as sole literary executrix, and does that mean that you are responsible for all of Mr. Hemingway's unprinted works?
Ernest's will was a simple, in his round hand and pencil, I think it was, holograph will, in which he left me everything, comma, including my literary property, and appointed me executrix of the whole shebang, which was an enormous job he loaded on my shoulders, because he had left, one time I said 40 pounds, that was an exaggeration, but a very great deal of unpublished manuscript.
Why were they unpublished?
Well, basically, he was a man, he was a writer, and what he wanted to do was write. And so he would finish something or have it at some point in which he wished not to work further on it. And so he'd give it to me and say, take it to your bank. I would take it and stick it in a safe deposit box down in my bank in Havana. One of the reasons I think perhaps the principal one, was that he didn't wish to publish always when he had finished something, was that we were doing all right on whatever income we had, and he didn't wish to suddenly get a big bunch of royalties which would raise the tax level way, way up. That is, not being unkind to Uncle Sam, but putting us into, for a year or two, a big high tax bracket.
So in effect, by giving you the unprinted material, it was almost the same as putting money in the bank.
Yes, was. He was saving it, as it were.
What are the responsibilities of an executrix, though?
Enormous and complicated. Of course, I have never done any publishing. We've published 4 books, if I recall correctly, perhaps 5. I always in consultation with the editors at Charles Scribner Jr. himself and 1 or 2 of his editors. The first one we published, because I knew Ernest had intended to publish it, was A Movable Feast, which was about his early days in Paris. And we then did, I'm not sure whether this is in chronological order, we did one called Byline, which was a collection of Ernest's, basically his newspaper stuff, signed stories from, I can't remember where, but Esquire and many of the other magazines for which he worked, sports magazines, things like that. And another one was, we came across some stories about Nick Adams, who had been one of his characters in many of his short stories. We came across 3 or 4 absolutely new ones, and I thought what a nice idea to make a book of Nick Adams stories. And even though the first story was not finished, not entirely finished, it sort of left hanging in midair, we published it as he had written and left it, and made a book of Nick Adams stories. And then the last one, which I like very much myself, I think that was the last one, was a thing called Islands in the Stream, which is a fiction thing, and which I think is really going to be a standard, strong part of his literary estate.
So there will be at least one more book, too, coming out, won't there be?
I anticipate. It takes a lot of very careful work and comparisons and the use of whatever good judgment I can sum up.
We know that you were Ernest Hemingway's 4th wife, but I understand that you were extremely close with Pauline, his 2nd wife, and also I know from reading your book on your autobiography that you were very close with Marlene Dietrich, who was a close friend of Ernest Hemingway's. How did you come to have the tolerancy and the acceptance of other women in your husband's life?
He was a terribly attractive fellow. How could I expect him not to attract other women? It seemed illogical. It would seem logical to me. He attracted me. Why shouldn't he attract other girls? Females.
But you were able to befriend them? Was that a strategy on your part?
Sure, the fact that they liked him and he liked them, well, what difference does that make to me? I liked them too. So, and the thing about Pauline, is that, of course, I had nothing to do with the breakup of her marriage to Ernest, and it was a sort of, one of the children was ill in Cuba, and it was she, so she decided to come over and help with the nursing and looking after this child, and we thus became friends, and stayed friends for, until she died.
In the book that you recently wrote, How It Was, you do allude to the fact that he did have some moments of being a little bit off balance or showing possibly what would come. And
Yes,
you did admit that he,
eccentricities.
eccentricities, and that you did admit that he did do away with his own life.
Oh, yes. I couldn't admit it. I could not in the beginning, in some attempt at self-preservation, because his shooting himself, in a sense, was a wound to me as well, and desperate, and I could not admit for quite a while that it was not accidental. I knew truly that it wasn't accidental, but I couldn't face that fact. This is some kind of idiot attempt at self-defense, I think, or self-protection, and it was, of course, totally illogical, but I did it anyhow. There's no excuse for it, particularly.
You're probably aware that many people feel that in his many writings there seemed to be an underlying factor of almost a death wish, and also much of the way he lived, people say that he had a death wish. Do you believe that?
Ernest wrote, I can't remember where, but Ernest wrote somewhere about that, and people attributing to him the death wish bit. He always said, it's a very simple thing to do away with oneself if one wishes to. There's no point in attributing to me that death wish thing. It was in some magazine within the last, I don't know, 15 or 20 years, but I can't remember which one.
What was the most memorable thing that you did with him? What's the thing that, was it the fishing or bullfighting, or what were the things that you remember most about your life?
You can't pick out one memorable moment. There were thousands, it seemed to me. There were thousands of memorable moments. Waking up in Africa and getting dressed in the cool dawn and looking forward to a day in which there was absolutely nothing, no time limits. We were never bracketed by time. We never knew what was going to happen. That was one of the great things. But it wasn't a particularly memorable thing. It was a matter of a great succession of days which could be characterized as without monotony.
Do you have any regrets about giving up your own career as a journalist?
No, certainly not. I had a lot more fun. I would never have, probably, as a journalist, I would not have gone to Africa, perhaps. I certainly would have known so much about Spain or Venice, or a lot of other things.